Welcome back to AME's Facilitated Sessions, where mentorship and mastery meets to fuel your journey in medicine. I'm your co-host and moderator, Dr. Darren Wayne Jackson II, and I'm joined by my co-host and expert learning facilitator, Dr. David Leon Taylor.
Welcome back to our scholars.
Now, get us caught up a little bit about, we've been going off the streets for a little while, so just catch us up. Let everybody know what we've been doing.
Yeah, we've been having a real good time, DJ. We've been on the road, right? We've been on the road, different parts of the country, in particular, of course, in Pittsburgh, where we had a chance to meet a lot of our scholars at the AMEC conference, right?
A lot of
Student
fun there.
National Medical Association. A lot of engagement there. A lot of scholars coming up and saying, hey, we enjoy the conversation on facilitated sessions, and we really appreciate your feedback when you meet us in person and just share with us that the discussions we've been having have been beneficial to your journey right now in medicine. And, after we moved from the Pittsburgh timeframe, we hit a couple other areas across the country. And then our final stop was in New Jersey.
Right.
And in New Jersey, man, we had a real good time there. We had several different groups of scholars, including some high school seniors who will be beginning their journey as freshmen, undergraduate students soon.
Right.
That was powerful. And you played a great role in their enrichment. They were in an enrichment experience we had in exploring health careers, particularly in allopathic or osteopathic medicine, either one of those two domains of medical school. And you had a wonderful time kind of having them explore the pathways and also preparing them for the pre-medical journey.
Yeah.
What was that like?
So it was really interesting because I could think back to many of my experiences, transitioning from different benchmarks of higher education. So when working with our high school students, they were really engaged, really locked into what we're doing, because there's a lot of questions about, has what I've done before been enough?
Yeah.
And or is there any way that I can optimize what I'm doing when I get to that new space? So as high school students, that there's areas of improvement. We all know that there's areas of improvement. But when you are transitioning from high school, you have all of what's been told to you over the 4 years of high school as you're transitioning to college about what college is going to be like. Now you have autonomy to your schedule to some degree. You're doing your cooking, you're doing your shopping, you're managing when you go to sleep, and that was a big thing for us because walking into my dorms, I stayed in Baldwin Hall at Morgan State University. I remember my freshman year, up to 2:00 in the morning, everybody's doors open, video games,
Exactly.
Tetris, all the different, GTA and all.
You're
the
dating yourself with Tetris, by the way.
Well, no, Tetris is a game as old as time, but it's kind of like Monopoly.
All right.
It caused a lot of arguments and a lot of fights. Tetris became a very competitive thing, but oftentimes what I experienced, with that particular group of students and just in general, I know for myself, when you're going from high school to college, there's that little bit of fear of, this work now, this transition. Do I have the skill sets and the knowledge of being able to navigate this new schedule, this new autonomy, this new workload?
And a lot of times we hear about, okay, I just need to buckle down. I need to push through.
Right.
Like brute force. Just go hard on the work. And if I study hard, I'll get the outcome I want. But I think through your discussions you were sharing with the scholars, that's not always the case. There may be a smarter, more efficient way to approach your journey when you start in undergrad. But it still applies to us as we can continue through our entire undergraduate education, even professional education.
Yeah, the biggest thing with working with the students and some of the number one questions that was asked is, how do I do this?
Yes.
And after a lot of our work, you got to see through the reflections of the students that they did not understand so much intention goes into your study process, understanding yourself as a learner. How do you infuse the soft skills into that journey? It's like a puzzle, and so I often get a lot of amazement when I'm working with the students, and a lot of times we're conditioned to think that we're giving information and it's kind of going in one ear and out the other, right?
Right.
You know, because that's just what, you know, as a mentor mentee, you think that the first couple of passes is just going to be like, you know, passive listening. But what I was very, you know, surprised by was the intent of the listening, but then the reflections, but then the follow-up questions. That's how I knew these students really wanted to understand, how do I learn? What goes into the understanding of like having the awareness of who I am as a learner? What is going on from an anatomical, anatomical, you know, standpoint? What's going on in the brain? Neuromodulators, neuroplasticity.
Oh, that's sounding fancy.
Yeah. What are these mechanisms that's going on? And how do I apply that when I sit down and I take these exams? Because ultimately they want to get the scores. So there's a lot of, and I know you have, you know, experience with that as someone who's been in the academic learning field as a dean of student learning, a senior dean of student learning for over, you know, for the number of years that you was at Georgetown School of Medicine. And as I said before, and we laugh about this all the time, it wasn't until I got to you that I said, oh man, there's actually a science to learning. You have to learn how to learn.
Yes.
And I was just the grit and bear and just kind of white knuckling through every academic aspect with no real intent or plan that is customized to you. Because that's the key part, is the customization. And so understanding that there's a customization piece to it, that's how I understood from you that learning is that you have to learn how to learn. It's a science of itself. So that's kind of what we're going to go through today. But, you know, just what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's the intentionality, as you said, and then with intentionality, we say, do we have a specific plan of action that we're going to engage in so that we can learn efficiently and effectively? And there is a science to that process. And as we say, the science behind anything simply means, can you help me understand the key steps that will allow me to accomplish my goals, right? That's the science. And so our discussion now over the next couple of segments, we're going to break that down, right? What are some key helpful areas to understand about how our brain works will be one of the segments. Help us understand a little bit more about that.
So that brings us into, what are we going to be talking about today? And so it's the science of learning. And so breaking this down into the different segments, you know, first we want to understand kind of our biological barriers. What is within our brains, our natural anatomical, physiological systems that are built in to our brain, hardwiring, that allows us to navigate this whole process of learning and encoding. And then we're going to have a discussion about memory, the different types of memory, what memory is important for different aspects of learning and encoding, and kind of break that down, layering some of these brain areas that are very pivotal for that learning process, and how we can optimize different aspects of our day-to-day life to kind of optimize our encoding and learning. So this way, when you're getting into those exams, your STEP exams, your MCAT exams, you're able to hardwire and encode that information in and retrieve that information in that time period that you need. And then one of the things that we're going to talk about a little bit later on is getting a little bit more deep into that, you know, mechanistic science aspect of the learning, the neuroscience of the learning, where we're talking about neuromodulators. So these are things that, you know, neurotransmitters, neuromodulators, you've heard of these words, you know, dopamine, endorphins, norepinephrine, adrenaline, right? Noradrenaline. These are things that, as well as the anatomical structure of the brain, these neuromodulators are working in synergy with our brain in this encoding and learning process. And I always say, DT, it's very important to have the tagging, The knowledge, have the verbiage and the mechanistics aspects of what's going on in your body. So this way you can optimize that. So for the purposes of this FS discussion, we're talking about learning and encoding. So we want to look at these brain areas, the different types of learning, and then, the different types of memory, and then also the neuromodulators that's at place and that's at play that is helping this encoding process. And then last but not least, when looking at the optimizing aspect of how we can better and more efficiently learn, because that was the big theme throughout us being on the road is I don't have infinite time and I don't have infinite energy to sit in this library for umpteenth hours to study, because then where does that leave my balance? Looking at those barriers. And if obviously you want to have these conversations, if you're under any care or treatment with a psychiatrist or a psychologist, you want to make sure that your care and treatment plan is right and tight with them. But with talking about these different things, understanding the neuroanatomy, the neurophysiology that makes up learning and encoding, how do we optimize things that we do in our day-to-day life, from our circadian rhythm, when we wake up, when we go to bed, different substances that we take that can help us navigate through some of these biological barriers to learn better, more efficient, and be able to recall that information. So just kind of a segment to segment wise, those are the things that we're going to get into today in our discussion with learning and encoding. How does that sound?
That sounds good. And so I want to make sure that as I think about these areas that you've talked about, because it sounds like this is going to be pretty in depth and it's going to be pretty interesting, that in essence you're saying once we figure out how we overcome certain barriers the brain has to how we take information in, because a lot of times we're trying to force information in and we're saying it's not going in, it's not going in. And so you're going to let us know there's some barriers and there's a reason why. So we understand that. Then we always are concerned about, I just can't seem to remember stuff. And that may mean we don't understand how memory works in the brain. So we're going to have this discussion around memory, which sounds pretty insightful. Then we're going to get a little sciencey, maybe not. You're going to break it down for us. I know you do a good job on that. But apparently, there is some biology going on here in the brain that we need to understand, because that biology can actually affect the memory. And you reminded us that if, of course, we are working with a health professional in other areas and understanding this biology will also be important, we just check in with them to make sure everything is cool. And then we wrap it up with an understanding how the brain likes to receive information so it doesn't give us a barrier, and understanding how our memory works and how these modulator things work, as you're talking about. We can actually develop strategies that are meaningful to each one of us that will help us be better learners. I say I want to be on this journey with you.
Okay, so let's jump in then.
Let's jump into segment one.
So segment one, we are overcoming the biological barrier. So what do you think I mean by overcoming the biological barrier when I'm talking about learning and science?
Well, it sounds like to me that, there's certainly something happening in the brain that probably a lot of us have never thought about. It's a biological process where the brain says, you want to take some information in? And I keep thinking about how I might look at the flashcards 20 times because someone told me that, the Anki or this space repetition works. But for some reason, for me, it's not working.
So I like that you brought up those words, because those are things that as students, I still think of myself as a student, but I have a lot of students. But in talking to many of my students, you think of you have the Pomodoro effect, the Pomodoro method, the spaced repetition. All of these things are strategies, and they're all well and good, and they're very effective depending on the person and the learner that's using them. But the thing that you also said was, what happens when I get to that ding? That's what I call it. I know as learners, each and every one of you have been in this particular situation where you have studied so much and you're like, I can't take any more information in. I'm ready to take this test, whether or not I feel ready to take it or I don't, but I literally cannot put any more information into my head. And we call that the hard limit stop, and this is, the hard encoding limit. So this is a thing that our brain has naturally hardwired into our system as a defense mechanism for that overwhelming feeling of information. Our brain naturally is not designed to take in all of this dense biological pre-medical information all in one sitting. So when you hit that information limit, it's not that something is necessarily wrong with you, it's that this is an actual physiological aspect of your brain that is telling you, whoa, we need to sit with this a little bit more.
Okay.
So we call that the hard encoding limit, right? So it's the brain can only absorb so much dense pre-medical information before our brains is like, whoa, let's slow this down.
I can already see how that can begin to make a difference, only as a coming attraction in our strategy for learning. Because if I understand there's a certain amount of information that's reasonable for my brain to take in so I can actually understand it, that means I need to think through, as you were saying earlier, okay, maybe I can plan my study time to do this amount of work.
Right.
There's a natural break to give the brain an opportunity to kind of work with the information that I put in there.
Right.
And then I can come back to it. There may be some more things we talk about, but that just seems like a natural piece. Whereas as a pre-med student, a lot of times I hear, you just need to stay in the library and keep pushing.
No.
You just need to stay with it.
No.
You're going to stay with it, you're going to get behind. So there's a balance where we plan how much we take in, and I know I have X amount, so I need to figure out how I do that with appropriate breaks, which is good for me and my wellness, but it's actually optimal for my brain.
Right. So how we talk about in genetics, we talk about epigenetics. So we have our genes and our gene expressions, but part of our gene expression is not just what's hardwired into the DNA, but also the environment that these genes are in, right? So that influences the level of expression, whether it gets expressed, the gene gets expressed or not, right? So I think about learning in that sense. There's a primary component of learning, the sitting down, what neuromodulators, what part of the brain is at play when you're doing that sit down aspect. But then the epigenetics of learning is, what is your sleep like? What is that bringing those things back in from the opener? What is your sleep like? How much sleep are you getting? Because that has an effect on some of these neuromodulators and neurochemical aspects that's going through our body, that's connecting to certain areas of our brain, that's facilitating those neuroplastic aspects of our nervous system to keep this information stored in our long-term memory. And
now, that just sounds very high level to me.
Right.
That sounds very high level what you share with me. And I know you're an expert in this area, by the way.
Right.
And so I know we're going to be breaking some of those pieces down.
Yeah, we're breaking that down later on.
In the future segments. And just as a quick aside, I'm glad you used the analogy of genetics and you explained it, because I got to see in genetics. And so just want to let the studio audience know again, sometimes we all have areas of improvement.
Right.
But I like the way you broke that down, in essence, reminding us that there are other important factors that we have to take into account, such as sleep, such as break time,
such as mental health.
All of those can impact this, what you call the hard stop mechanism in the brain.
The hard encoding stop.
Right?
Yeah.
That hard encoding stop. And we're going to hear more about that later in future segments, because those three areas, sleep and rest and mental health, they actually impact these neuromodulators or substances that we find out later actually influence how well we can learn.
Absolutely. So, that's where the strategies come into place and become a key thing that we can utilize to optimize, right? When you're talking about learning not just being this one linear thing, it's a circular process. It's a process that involves different components. That's the epigenetics. That's the things around it. That gives you more leverage as as a person, as a learner, to be able to utilize these different strategies that are kind of piggybacking off of these aspects of learning to help the encoding process, if that makes sense.
It does.
So we're going to talk about how we can tap into, like I said, we're going to talk about the mechanisms, the neuromodulators, but then we'll go into those particular strategies that we can use later on down the road to help optimize the encoding process.
So in addition to this built-in hard stop, that we have to understand that for each of us, our brain has this embedded, and it may be at different limits based on our lived experiences and how we've been learning. It'd be interesting to figure out, does our brain learn based on whatever we're trying to do in our professional pathways, that maybe it can expand that hard stop? So maybe early on in life, the hard stop is here, but as I begin to take in more information, the brain says, okay, you're learning a lot more complex information. I'm going to expand your hard stop, but there's still a hard stop. Is there information on that?
Yeah, so the hard stop, that hard limit can be modified based off of some of these things in the epigenetic field of learning. So because our ability, like I said, when we learn, we're creating new neuronal connections within our brain, right? Our brain has a finite amount of energy to be able to make these new neuronal connections.
Okay.
And so with that means at some point we're going to get to that hard limit. How do we expand this hard limit? Well, going back to some of these strategies, sleep could be one, right? Okay. So if we're expanding our sleep, then we thus have much more energy to be able to put into this process. If we have too little sleep because we're chronically, pulling overnighters, all-nighters, and, with our studying, well, then some of these other aspects, the neuromodulators, the different things that we can optimize in this learning process, well, they have different levels. Those levels respond to different states that our body is in, which is a product. I was going to say a substrate, but that's the after. Is a product of some of these other things that we're doing in our day-to-day life. So if we're exercising, we're then optimizing neuroepinephrine and epinephrine, which helps to focus and alert and aware when we're studying. If you do like I did in my first year of medical school, where I said, I don't have time to work out. And I love to work out. But I said, I don't have time to work out. And guess how many pounds? I got up to 219 pounds my first year of medical school. I'm normally sitting at 170, 168, And so with that being said, the abandonment of the physical movement, the understanding about breaks and how motion and movement, harnesses that encoding power. That's how we're talking about being able to optimize that hard limit. We can expand it or we can shrink it depending on our body states, which is secondary to how we're moving about in our day-to-day life.
All right. That makes sense now, why a lot of times we hear from a general recommendation point of view, make sure you balance your studying with exercise, but we're seeing how exercise, make sure you balance your studying with good rest and sleep. We're seeing how all those factors now are beginning to impact this biology of the brain, overcoming those barriers, and actually helping us maybe expand the brain's ability to help us. And when you say encode, that word encoding means taking information that we believe is important and storing it in the brain for some meaningful purpose or future use, right? And obviously, as future physicians, that means we need this information so we can problem solve in patient care.
Exactly. So that's why we can't willpower through it. You can't willpower through the natural biological defense mechanism your brain has built in to not overload and overwhelm itself with dense medical data, right? With that being said, how do you expand that limit? Or more so, not so much even expand, how do you optimize the efficiency to be able to lower the energy requirement of the encoding process? If you lower the energy requirement, You give your brain more time to be in the field to capture more information,
Yes.
to make more neural connections, to better encode into your long-term memory for faster retrieval when you're in these exams.
So this sounds like we're now ready to move into segment 2,
Yes.
which is going to help us understand memory and how, when we begin to incorporate some of these early strategies and understanding the brain has limits, now we can begin to say, okay, if we understand those limits, how do we work within those limits optimally, and therefore take advantage now of the type of memory that we need to use to be outstanding physicians, coming up in our next segment
Right. See you
on
there.
facilitated sessions.